Good morning, children. It's time for another one of our stories from the Godly Play curriculum. Godly Play is published by Church Publishing, and all of the materials in the Godly Play curriculum are copyrighted. Today's story takes place in the desert. I can't bring the whole desert into the classroom, so we're bringing just a little bit of the desert. The desert is a place that is always moving and changing. It is also a place with very little water, and a place that if you don't have water, when traveling through the desert, you could die if you didn't have water. It's also a place that not very much grows in the desert. The desert is also a place of very different weather. It's very hot during the day, and at night it gets very cold. And when the wind blows, the sand will sting on your skin. So this is why people wear a lot of clothes when they're in the desert to protect them from the sun, the cold, and the stinging sands. No one goes into the desert unless they have to. This takes place after the Great Flood and after all the animals scattered to the four corners of the world to start new life again. The people often were living in places, they had moved to villages and places beside the rivers. And the animals liked to go beside the river because they had plenty to drink and there was food that would grow beside the rivers. There was a large city beside the river named Ur. And the people that lived there believed in many gods. They believed there was a God for every tree, every flower, every rock, every piece of land. There was a God of the skies, there was a God of the water and the land. Their world, they believed, was full of gods. But there was one family that believed that their God was everywhere. They did not know it yet, but that's what they believed. Adam and Sarah were members of that family. When it came time for them to move, they wondered if God would be in the new place. They were not sure. They decided to move and to start walking towards a smaller city named Haran. They walked along the river with their animals and their helpers. It was a long walk, but as they approached Haran, they saw people coming out and they knew they were close. Once they lived here, sometimes Abram would go outside and look out at the desert and look at all the stars in the sky. Abram would look to the sky and he would feel that God was close to him. And God felt close to Abram. Sometimes when this happened, Abram knew what God was thinking. And God asked Abram and Sarah to move again. Abram and Sarah did what God asked them. But this time there was no river that they were going to be able to use to find their way and get water. They took their tents, they took their animals, and they walked through the desert. They first came to a town called Shechem. And here, they knew that God was here. They prayed and they built an altar because God was there. They left again to walk on their journey, and they came to a little town of Bethel, and God was there. And Abram built an altar to celebrate that God was there. They then left Bethel and walked again through the desert with all their helpers and their animals and their tents until they finally came to the town of Hebron. And this is where they made their home, near the oaks of Mamre. One night, God brought Abram outside to look up into the sky. And Abram felt close to God, and God felt close to Abram. And God told Abram that he was going to be the head of a great family, that he and Sarai would have a son. Well, Abram laughed because he and his wife were old. They did not think they could have children. One day, Abram and Sarah were at their home in their tent when 3 strangers came to visit. Abram's wife went in to cook for them and made bread with lots and lots of flour and fed the strangers bread and meat and gave them milk and water to drink, as was their custom. Before the 3 men left, they told Abram, who was now called Abraham, and Sarai, who is now called Sarah, that they would have a son. Well, Abram laughed and said they were too old. Sarah was outside the tent and heard the 3 strangers, and she laughed because she said, "We are too old." And the strangers left, and later on, guess what happened? Sarah and Abraham had a son, and they laughed. They named their son Laughter, and in their language, the word for laughter is Isaac. Isaac grew up to be a young man, and when he was all grown up, his mother Sarah died, and she was buried in the caves of Mamre. Abraham was very sad after Sarah died, and he knew that he was getting old, but he knew he had one more thing that he needed to do. He wanted to find a wife for his son Isaac. So he asked one of his helpers to go back to his hometown and look for a wife for his son Isaac. So he sent his helper away, and he journeyed back across the desert to help Abraham find a wife for his son Isaac. The helper stopped at a little town, and a young woman there was by the well. She gave the helper some water to drink, and he told her that she was kind and thanked her for helping him with the water and she also gave water for his animal. Rebecca invited him to come to her house and have dinner with her family. And when the helper came to Rebecca's house, he told Rebecca's family all about Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and the great family. When Rebecca heard this story, she decided she wanted to be part of the great family. So she traveled with the helper back through the desert until they reached Hebron. Isaac came to meet them, and he met Rebekah, and he and Rebekah married. Abraham had been getting old, and he died and was buried next to his wife, Sarah, in the caves of Mamre. Rebekah and Isaac started a family, and their children had children. Their children had children, and they had more and more families and children for hundreds and hundreds of years until your grandparents had children and your parents had children. So you are part of the great family that believed that God is everywhere. Now you are part of the great family that's as large as all the stars in the sky and all the sand in the desert. Now I wonder, what part of the story did you like best? I wonder what part was most important. I wonder what part are you in the story? I wonder if there's any part of the story that we can leave out and still have all the story that we need. I wonder what you would like to do to help you remember the story.